So, hi everyone, my name is Katherine Ellis. I'm a research fellow in the neurodevelopmental disorder lab, which is led by Dr. Jo Moss at the University of Surrey. I'm going to be talking today about how to run research online with a particular focus on children with an intellectual disability using eye tracking studies. So a bit of background about what we do in the lab. So we are interested in genetic syndromes that are associated with an intellectual disability, but we're more interested in them because of their distinct profiles of autistic traits, and these differ between one another and also those with non-syndromic autism. And so what we do is look at variability at the social cognitive level across these groups, which might explain perhaps the differences in autistic traits, with the hope that this work is going to help to lead to the development of more individualised support for these groups. So one of the big challenges of working with these populations, which are already really underrepresented in research, is finding tasks that can give us really good, deep phenotyping, social cognitive phenotyping information, but also reliable and valid, but are appropriate for people with quite limited language, attention and motor skills. And this is where eye tracking has been really useful. So we've got a couple of eye tracking tasks that look at social cognitive abilities, such as this gaze following task. And this works really well in our groups because it's a completely passive paradigm. They don't have to do any particular tasks, but we can get really nice detailed information about what they're looking at. And this helps us to understand how they might be processing the world around them without them having to, tell us using language. And so prior to the pandemic, we were doing this face-to-face using a Tobii laptop, and this was working really well. It was transportable. We could take it to people's homes. We could sit on the floor with the kids. And we were finding that the paradigms that we were using were working with the neurotypical control groups. And we were starting to find some really nice, interesting early online research in these groups. Obviously, with the pandemic, it's just not ethical to do these sorts of populations. So this is what gave us the push as many people to sort of work and see whether we could do this online. So we've been using the Gorilla sort of web eye tracking zone, which for those of you who don't know, utilises WebGazer. So this uses participants' own web camera to detect their face and then uses this information to give an estimate of where people are looking on the screen. And what you might notice is that I haven't just got the icon for Gorilla, but I've also got the icon for Teams. And this is because for these populations, being able to communicate with parents is really, really critical. So yes, in theory, we could just send links off to parents and say, give it a go with your kids, see if you can get them to watch the video and do the calibration. But for these particular populations who have a lot of additional needs, and often you need quite skilled researchers to get data face-to-face, when you're moving everything online, actually what our role as researchers has moved to is actually sort of being able to coach the parents to do our job, essentially, to be the researchers. And this is sort of the key point that I really want to emphasize. So what we ask parents to do is, if they're lucky enough to have a second device, is to set that up with a Teams link, and then what we'll do is coach them through setting up everything on their laptop, come up with a plan before the child has even come into the room, to make sure that we try and make everything run as smoothly as possible, because the aim is to make sure that the child is sitting for as limited amount as possible, and we don't want them to sit there for any longer than is necessary. But it's not just sort of during the testing session where we will do this. Actually, communication is really vital throughout the whole research process. And this starts from perhaps your first recruitment call. And this is where you're really starting to establish a partnership with that parent, and you establish the strategy that you're going to work with before you actually have the actual testing session. And every child is different, and it's talking through what's going to motivate them, what's going to make them feel the most comfortable, and what's going to help the parent in that situation. Following for that, you want to provide some resources over email. So this is where you might provide some more detailed information about things like internet speed. But what's really been helpful at this point has been sending parents an eye tracking dummy link. So actually they can sort of have a go at the eye tracking themselves, see how it works, see what doesn't work. And this helps parents feel a lot less anxious about what happens on the actual test day, because they feel they understand what's going to happen, even if it is relatively straightforward. And then hopefully by that point, by the time that you get to the testing sessions, the parents feel supportive, you're there for any tech issues, and it's just ensuring that there's a calm environment to make sure kids feel relaxed and parents feel relaxed, because if you have a stressed parent, a stressed child, you're not going to get good data. And I just wanted to highlight here one of the biggest challenges that we have, which is achieving calibration. And this is because I think in Gorilla, WebGazer is in beta mode at the moment. It's not as forgiving as perhaps the calibration procedure as in the Toby laptop. And this has been one of the major sort of barriers to overcome, not just in child research, but I think in adult research as well. And I just wanted to sort of show you some of the information that we send to parents, which were given from Sarah White's lab, who very kindly passed this on to us, and just highlight sort of all the number of things that you have to think about before even getting started, to make sure that the situation is set up as best as possible to make sure everything runs really, really smoothly. So you might be thinking at this point, gosh, this is a lot of effort. Is it worth it with these populations? And if it works, actually, it definitely is. And there's some advantages. And I think hopefully our work will lead to some reflections on sort of a cost benefit analysis of who and when to do this research with. So one of the really good things about online research with these particular groups is the amount of burden that it reduces for families who often have quite a lot of additional burdens for caring with a child with additional needs. The main thing being lack of travel, sort of extra flexibility, and sort of less pressure to get everything done, considering that the groups that we work with are often spread around the country because they're quite rare. And yes, there are challenges, but there are ways of getting around it. But of course, any sort of good cost benefit analysis is going to be dependent on the data. And we are getting some positive results. We're finding that actually kids are able to get past that calibration, and that's a huge achievement, I think. So a lot of the typically developing kids are calibrating, and we're getting useful information out of them. And then for the syndrome groups, actually about 2/3 are managing to calibrate. And I'm absolutely thrilled about this, because although it might not be as high as the face-to-face calibration, you know, that's 8 out of 12 kids who haven't had to come to the lab and have additional burdens. And I think this is really, really great news. And what I want to do is I've started to sort of draw out the descriptive characteristics of the syndrome children who are being successful and who aren't. And there's no clear picture at the moment because there's a lot of overlap in these characteristics. So sort of my message is just give it a go at this moment. And then, of course, we want to find out, is the data meaningful? Is it valid? And we don't have the sample size yet to say for certain whether the paradigms that we are using are working online, but we know that they are working in adult populations. And in terms of sort of a simple social video viewing paradigm, we're seeing sort of patterns of behaviour which are similar to previous findings, particularly in the Fragile X group. So they are watching the social scenes, they're just doing so in terms of shorter episodes. And this is perhaps what we would expect in this group. So that's promising. So thank you for listening. Do let me know if you have any questions. Drop me an email. I've got heaps of stories that I can't share in 8 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The question I have is about from Gaia Scarif, which is about the samples calibration data, which did look really interesting. But how often did you find that you needed to recalibrate, and how long were your sessions in total?
So our videos are really short. So they were only about 4 to 5 minutes, and we haven't had any reports. And you know, I've watched that we haven't had any reports of actually when they've got past the calibration that they've had to recalibrate, and that's really, really promising. So that's a really good sign, because I think there was a huge question of whether you'd be able to do anything like this with this population. Yeah. And then, sorry, was there a second part of the question?
Yes. How long are your sessions in total?
So, as I said, the actual video is really, really short. The sort of range of sessions really depends a child. And as I said, the good thing is we can be flexible. So for some kids, 20 minutes is like the absolute limit, and that's a range of behavioural and cognitive tasks. For some, they can do it a little bit longer, and you just sort of have to be very flexible in terms of how long or how little you do. And you do find, one of the things that I didn't mention is sometimes you find that parents tend to be a bit more concerned about whether kids do it or not. So as a researcher, what's really important is making sure you know when to jump in and say, do you know what, I think we've done a lot, why don't we try it another day?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And don't forget, you can continue asking questions in the Q&A, and those be answered by the speakers like Katherine after they finish talking. Thank you very much, Katherine.